Abdul Majid II was the last man to hold the title Caliph of the Muslims in modern history, marking the end of a long era of Islamic rule that had lasted for more than 13 centuries. After the abolition of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1920 by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the first president of the Turkish Republic, Abdul Majid, found himself exiled, living in near obscurity, carrying with him the broken dreams and fading memories of an empire that no longer existed. He was born on May 29, 1868, in Istanbul. The son of Caliph Abdul Aziz I, he grew up in the palaces of the Ottoman sultans, receiving a refined education in religion, literature, and the arts. He had a deep love for painting, music, and literature, a passion that set him apart from his ancestors, who had focused mainly on politics and war. Yet, he never expected to become Caliph himself, especially after the Sultanate was abolished in 1922 and replaced with a purely symbolic caliphate. On November 19, 1922, the Turkish parliament chose him as Caliph after the deposition of Sultan Mehmed VI. But his role was merely ceremonial, devoid of real power. His duty was to preserve the spiritual unity of Muslims at a time when the Ottoman state was collapsing under European occupation and rising nationalist movements. On March 3, 1924, the Turkish government led by Ataturk issued a decree abolishing the caliphate completely and banishing Abdul Majid and his family from Turkey. That same night, the last caliph of Islam left his homeland for Switzerland, and later settled in France, where he lived the harsh reality of exile. Exile was not simply a change of place. It was a total transformation for a man who had once lived in the splendor of Istanbul's palaces. Now, he found himself poor and dependent on the help of friends and on what little money he earned from selling his paintings. Some Muslims tried to help him, such as King Fuad I of Egypt, who invited him to live in Cairo, but British opposition prevented it. In Paris, he lived in a modest apartment, facing great financial hardship, although he was once the Caliph of the Muslims. The Islamic world was now preoccupied with building nation-states, and there was no longer a place for the caliphate in modern politics. Some Muslim leaders, including the Emir of Afghanistan and members of the Caliphate movement in India, attempted to support him. But their help was limited and could not change his tragic situation. In exile, Abdul Majid immersed himself in art and literature. He wrote the story of his life, though it was never fully published, and painted works that reflected his longing for Istanbul. He suffered from loneliness and illness, and in his final years, his health declined due to diabetes and heart disease. Abdul Majid passed away on August 23, 1944 in Paris, spending his last days in extreme poverty. Only a few acquaintances attended his funeral, and his body was not returned to Turkey until more than 50 years later, when he was finally reinterred in Istanbul in 2006, after efforts by the Turkish government. In exile, he lived the tragedy of a man who had lost his homeland and his status, yet he preserved his dignity to the very end. He may not have been a brilliant politician or military commander, but he was a man of culture and art, carrying into exile the dreams of an empire that survived only in memory. Today, Abdul Majid II is remembered as the last link in the long chain of caliphs. Though his end was sorrowful, his story remains a timeless chapter in history that will never be forgotten.